Really appreciate that. It's so much like my dating life, and just a lot of emptiness and people over there. And I really appreciate it. I don't know how to break it to you, but the jokes only go to the first 2 rows. So I will not be funny back there tonight. And sorry. And anyway, so it's good to be back, and good to be. Thank you for bringing your friends. Thank you for being here tonight. And I've been so encouraged about what is going on through this ministry, and just how you connected with your friends and brought people. We've had a lot of people in and out. It's been so great. How many of you guys went to the retreat? Anybody retreat? Okay. Yeah. Nice. So it's always good to get away. And I spent I was up in Buffalo, New York, a week before last, and I was around all married people. And I know some of you guys are married. How many of you guys have raised kids in your life? Raised kids? Okay, all right. So I was I was way out of my element, quite frankly. And but I was with the pastor, has young kids, and I don't know how old they are, but they're like, whatever you are. How old is that right there? What is that? Okay. And I'm so single, I don't even care enough to know. But whatever that is right there. And, right. So I just made some of you feel better because you're like, I'm single, but Dave's really single, and it's so different. And so one of his sons is drinking out of a sippy cup. You guys had the experience with a sippy cup? Anybody? Right? And which is like, I don't know what kind of liquid mess is it, but there's some sort of unwritten rule that before you drink it, you first have to dump it on yourself. I don't know, like a kid misses his mouth and it goes all over here, and then he won't drink it, and so the dad has to drink it and pretend like it's tasty. I don't even know what's in that stuff, but he goes, it is so tasty. I was like, let me taste of it, right? And he gave me a little hit of it, and it tasted like a hot armpit. And I don't know what that was about. I don't even know how kids grow up, right? You're feeding them that kind of poison when they're little, and and he had different ages, so he's got kids that kind of go like this. It looks, when they all stand together, they look like the evolutionary chart, so the other one graduated from the sippy cup to the juice box. How about the juice box? Are we supposed to believe that quenches anybody's thirst with a straw that is like a millisecond? Or and you have to hold it just right. If you don't hold it, if you hold it to the sides, it shoots out and squirts you in the eye. It's just a mess, and then you go from there to the water bottle, right? Which we all kind of run water bottle world now, And I did a staff meeting while I was up there, and they served Perrier water. I mean, mega church, right? And but on the back of the bottle it says, "This water was captured at the source." Right? You have to capture water. Is that what's happening now? Or not kidnapped, not apprehended, captured. Right? Anyway, so I don't. And then they just opened a new, like a little rip and run or shop and lives or whatever you call it, 7-Eleven, by my house, and so they're serving. I've kind of been fascinated with this whole cup thing, and they're serving like the Big Gulp. Have you had the Big Gulp cup? And then for 25 cents more, you get like the Mega Big Gulp, which is basically like a giant cup with a jet ski floating in it. You're like, does this come with a free pair of Depends? And because I'm going to need it for later. And so it's been a different kind of existence and stuff. And so but one of the things I did while I was up there was I did 2 single adult deals, which was great fun. So I did a Thursday night single adult, kind of like what we're doing here. And then I did a weekend single adult conference, which is great. But now I've done other single adult stuff that's been a little sketchy. Like I did one in Houston, Texas. I forget, it was like north of Houston, and when it was at the VFW Center or whatever, And so I walk in, and there's like 75 single adults in a giant circle, all doing the chicken dance. You know the chicken dance? You know what I'm talking about, the chicken dance, right? And I'm at the back of the room watching this. All I could think to myself was, if you're in a circle doing the chicken dance and thinking to yourself, why am I not married? And there might be a connection, and you might want to look into that. And so, right, and then I was up. I followed the chicken dance, right? I was the intermission, right? I got them told jokes, and then I was done so they could get back to more chicken dancing. And so crazy. Right, so I've done a lot of stuff like that in life, but I did one in Norman, Oklahoma. All right, so which is a little south of Moore where the storm was. But I did a single adult Sunday. Right, so they brought me to be the speaker for Sunday morning, like for big church, because they thought that'd be clever, right? It's a Sunday honors single adults, right? So we'll have this guy who's the really single guy come in, and so before I got up, they ran a video, right? So they give a single Sunday. We interviewed some of our single adults, right? And so like the head of the screen is, what do you love about being single, right? And I don't know where they got these people. I didn't see them in the crowd. I don't know if they were like extras or if it was a skit. But every terrible thing you could think about being single was what these people were talking about, right? It was like, what do you love about being single? And like one was like, I can stay up as late as I want. I can stay up as late as I want. No one can tell me when to go to bed. I'm like, oh, no. And then it cuts to another guy. The guy's like, I can eat as many donuts as I want and nobody can stop me. Right? And I'm on the front row going, at least lie to the people, right? I mean, at least tell all these married people that it's good, right? I mean, it just seems like that. I've been in these environments where it just seems to send the wrong message, right? It just sends the wrong message, And so tonight, I know a lot of us, man. Some of us are here. You never planned to be single. It was never on your agenda. And some of you are thankful that you are, right? Others, you've never been married, and whatever got this to our state and place. We got to get to a place where we can begin to get to a place what I call less strife, more life. Less strife, more life. That video had such a high cringe factor on it because this is what they were portraying, right? That single adults that they're undisciplined, that their lives are out of control, that they're crazy. All that kind of stuff. It's okay to be single as long as you're not the reason, right? It's nothing wrong with not being married as long as you're not the reason, right? And I did a deal like this in Oklahoma City where afterwards this guy comes up and he's like from here to the whatever this is and the stand and podium and he's standing like this which is always a bad sign and it's just there's nothing good about that, right? That kind of blocks space, and it just kind of is a non-verbal way of saying, I'm weird. And I was like, hey, bro, how's it going? And he's like, doing this and kind of looking past me. You ever talk to people who kind of look at your ear? Like, they don't look at you now, they look right here. So you're always trying to move over to get it. And they keep going, right? And it was like that. I'm trying to strike up a conversation with this guy. He keeps looking over next to me, and he is like, yeah. I was like, yeah, this is opening line. Yeah. I'm like, yeah. And he says, I switched to a vinyl wallet, or a nylon wallet. I was like, really? Congratulations. I'm not even sure how that came up, or what. And while I'm talking to him, I just start to automatically go like this, right? I can't be a reason, right? And so, I said, so you switched to a nylon? He says, yeah. He says, because my butt sweats a lot. I said, you don't say. He said, no. I said, no, you don't say. He says, so I switched to a nylon. He continues, like there's more to the story. And he says, so I switched to a nylon wallet. He said, because I used to have a leather one, and when I would sit on it, the sweat would just go all the way through. Of course, it would ruin the leather. I was like, well, of course, right? And, of course, it's never a problem for cows, right? Cows get wet, and they don't get wet. And whatever got us to this state, right? We have to find a place where we can get to a place where there's less strife and more life in the way that we're living. That we don't get so up and, I mean, for that guy, it seemed totally natural to talk about his wallet and his rear end. And I think, man, that this guy has been off in a zone somewhere where he's just he's in a place where you get around normally they're like, that is weird, right? And nothing wrong with being unmarried as long as you're not the reason, right? You see what I'm saying? And so this means that we have to get to a point where we figure out how to live the life that God has for us, you know? And so, that's the real goal of what we're talking about tonight, is how we dial into this place. And I know some of us have been through drama in our past, and, there's been drama on both sides inside of a marriage, and, but still, there is a place that God designed for us to live that doesn't have to make us weird or whacked out, or, that you get to a place where you dial down the strife and you dial up the life, where, whatever the pain was, whatever the drama was, whatever the anxiety is, the things that kind of drives you crazy, there has to be some way that we can get through that, right? And get to a place where there's more life in our life and less strife, where there's more life to live, right? And not so much all the ghosts of the past that we drag around with us. You see it? And so, in a way, this is one of the things that Paul is taking on, is how to be happy with the life that you have, right? How to be happy, how to live the life that you have, that where you are at this place. And, I've given you 3 different titles, so you pick the one you like, right? And so, let's try more life, how to be happy with the life you have, and whatever the third one was. And, right, you see what I'm saying? But they're all saying the same thing. And so when you get over to this text, you get over to 1 Corinthians chapter 7, Paul is writing to all the different groups of the church, right? Typically, a lot of people kind of zero in on, what it says about singles. This is kind of the classic single adult verse, and all this kind of stuff. But prior to that, he's writing to married people. He's kind of clicking through the different demographics within the body, and he's saying, right, that we got to get to a place where we can be happy with the life that we have, right? To live the life that we have, right? Instead of wanting it to be something else, right? In other words, this is a call. This is to draw us back into the presence of God in a very real way. And so, how then do we do that? Right? How then do we dial down the strife and dial up the life? Right? How do we live the life that God's given us? Well, out of these little verses come these 3 little principles that every one of us, regardless of what you've been through, regardless of what you're through. I know you guys, some of y'all have been through. You got stories that I haven't journeyed through yet, right? But regardless of what stage or age you happen to be in, these 3 things, if we'll take them seriously, right? And they'll be more than just a little idea, and let them begin to navigate our life, will get us into a place where we can live the life that God has for us. See? So here we go. Number one, you have to locate your source of confidence. Right? You've got to locate your source of confidence. A lot of people, man, feel like their equilibrium's off, that they're off balance internally because something they used to have confidence in is gone. Right? And then they find something else to put their confidence in, and then it leaves, and then they look for something else. So this is what happens to a lot of people, is they have this feeling of instability, right? That they're out of balance on the inside because they're not quite sure what to place their confidence in. This is what Paul is talking about. This is 1 Corinthians chapter 7, verse 29. But I say, brethren, right? He's talking to the whole church. The time has been shortened. Right? He's saying, this is kind of one of the corollary verses of this is Ephesians 5, where it says, that we are to redeem the time because the days are short. Right? So he's not talking about daylight savings time. He's talking about the life that we have left to live. He said, so I say to everybody, the time has been shortened. See it? Look at this one. The time has been shortened. From now on, right, now look at this. Those who have wives should be as those who have none. Right? Some of you are like, well, amen. And bitter people said, no kidding. All right? And so, now look at this, right? And those who weep as though they did not weep, and those who rejoice as though they did not rejoice, and those who buy as though they did not possess, and those who use the world as though they did not make full use of it. Right now, the way to kind of get the meaning out of this verse is that there's a little phrase that appears in these 3 verses 5 times, and it's the phrase, as though. Right? He's talking about the way in which we live our lives. You know what happens to a lot of people? A lot of people they go through a lot of stuff, and they get to a place in life where they live as though God doesn't care. Or they live as though God's not in control. Or they live as though He's something to be remembered instead of in the present. Right? And so Paul's saying, some of us in this room have experienced every one of these things, right? We've been married, we've wept, right? And they follow each other so closely, and right? We've rejoiced, we've bought stuff, right? I mean, you look at these categories. He's talking about relationships, emotions, right? Weeping, rejoicing, possessions, right? The world, right? And he says, man, all of those things, all of us will experience those things in different ways, but none of those things are sources of confidence. Right? In other words, our emotions are up and down. Right? In the course of a day, maybe you can wake up happy and come back home angry. Right? I mean, that's just the way it is. Our emotions are kind of, some of it, they just go up and down like that. Right? And Paul's saying, wait a minute. We have to live, even though we weep, we have to live as though we're not defined by what's made us weep. And even though we rejoice, we have to live as though. Right? We're not defined by the things that have brought us great joy. And even those we possess things, right? Houses and cars and stuff and things we've enjoyed, right? We have to live as though that's not our source of confidence. You see, he's trying to get us into a headspace where instead of just being heat seekers of, well, maybe I can find someone who can give me confidence, or maybe I can just buy more junk, or maybe I can build my own car, that'll give me confidence. Maybe I can experience some feeling, right? And that'll give me confidence. And Paul says, wait a minute, we have to live as though those things have happened. Those things are real. But those aren't sources of confidence because they change. Right? I mean, this is his point. For the days have been short like this. They had to, look at verse 31, and those who use the world, right? Our jobs, right? Our eating, right? How we use the world, right? Those who use the world as though they did not make full use of it. Look, the form of this world is passing away, right? That's all form. Houses, cars, money, stuff, people, relationships, right? Those are all forms. And Paul's saying, wait a minute. There's nothing wrong with any of that stuff. We've all touched it, experienced it, tasted it, we benefit from it, we make our living out of this city. But he says, that's the world. And we can't put our confidence in the world. Right? So he says, man, you've got to locate your source of contentment. But, I mean, the only thing that outlasts all of that stuff is the presence of God. Right? We're all still here tonight because God is good, because His presence is everlasting. And so regardless of what you've been through, regardless of maybe what you've owned or how much you've owned or what you've been able to possess or how the world has treated you or what you've been able to, the kind of living you've been able to make, to say, you know what, I'm not going to live my life as though I've been defined by those things. Some of us have let our lives be defined by our greatest losses. And those things happen to you, but that's not your source of confidence. Some of us, we continue to kind of go back to the past. I mean, think about what most of us do is we spend so much time savoring the past. I remember when I lived in that one house, I was really happy. I remember if I could just get back to that one point where I had that car and I had that job. Or man, when I had my wife, or when I had my husband, or when we were still together. We spend so much time living as though we've been defined by all that stuff. And Paul says, we're going to taste it, we're going to touch it, we're going to experience it, we're going to feel it, but that's not your source of confidence. That's not your source. I got a buddy of mine who just went through rehab for the third time at $90,000 a day at you know, 3 months at a time. I mean, he spent a lot of money, and all they really taught him was to define himself based on his addiction. You know, I mean, that's what he came out with. You know, that you had to always define yourself by your greatest struggle or your greatest defeat. Well, that's not a biblical idea, right? Paul said, wait a minute, we're not defined by our defeat. You had to go through it. But your source of confidence is your identity in Jesus. You're a son of God. You're a daughter of God. We're not defined by our greatest loss. You had to live through it. I know some of us, man, it's taken years to pull back out of that and to finally feel light again and to finally feel hope again. But your source of confidence is not, I've been left alone. Your source of confidence is that God hasn't left me alone. I'm not living as though God has left me. His presence is my confidence. My identity in Him is my confidence. And so things happen to us, but that's not our source of identity. Too often we're trying to define ourselves by something that happened in the past, our greatest struggle, our greatest defeat, our greatest loss. Or we're trying to define ourselves and find confidence in our greatest success, or what we own, or the kind of watches that we have, or the cars we drive, and all that kind of. Paul says, wait a minute, all that's the form of the world, and all that stuff is passing away. You're an eternal being. I'm an eternal being. We're defined. Our confidence is in our relationship with God. We're defined by our identity in Christ. Now, this is a major head shift, I know, because if you spent 40 years of your life thinking about yourself in terms of the past, and then you got someone here who blows in here with a blue jacket on and says, no, wait a minute, that's not it. You're like, man, that's a hard place to pull up out of in a matter of 30 minutes. But you can get there. You're going to have to challenge those old thoughts that have held you captive. You're going to have to challenge those things that have beat you into submission and that have made you depressed. You're going to have to challenge them with a new truth that says, I belong to God. My identity, my confidence is in the Lord. It's not in other people or things or the approval of people or whether things went my way in the past. It's in God. Yeah, I have to say, you know, this is constantly challenged in my life by married people. And I don't think against marriage, but I do love to make fun of it. And right, I'm anything against it. All my friends are married, and I got invited to. I lived in Atlanta for many years ago. And, all my friends are married. They invited me to a get together in some area of Atlanta. And I was like, okay, give me the address, and I'll go. Normally, I don't go. I'm not typically an outgoing guy. And I told you before, I subscribe to back issues of Fearful Hermit. And right, so you know, I'm a bit of a recluse, and so I get the address, and I drive to this suburb in Atlanta, right? And I pull into the suburb. Every house looks exactly the same, right? This road is lined with McMansions, right? It looks like a Monopoly board. I mean, it's just, you know. And the only way I found the house was by the numbers, right? Because it looked like something out of the Truman Show, right? It looked like everything was the same, right? All the homes are lit. I mean, they are all red brick, white trim, minivans, and all the driveways, right? I mean, it is like, you know, Children of the Corn, right? You know what I'm saying? And so I matched the number up to the number on the curb. I'm like, this must be it, right? So I walk up, ring the doorbell. My buddy opens the door. It's the only guy I know. I don't know these people, right? And he opens the door, and behind him is just a room full of married people, right? I mean, as far as you can see, right? All the guys with like the khaki Dockers on with the golf belt and the golf shirt with the big block colors on it, right? Apparently that's like a married uniform, and they all had them on, right? And all the ladies, you know, with the I've given up haircut, you know what I'm talking about, you know, like the G.I. Jane haircut, you know, it's like, you know, the more kids a woman has, the shorter her hair gets. Like, if she gets married, she cuts her hair off, she's like, hey, the race is over, take the uniform off. And, I don't need to look good now. And, right, and so it's just I just lost the women in the house. And, but, you know, it's true. And so, anyway. So I kind of make my way. I'm like, hello, nice to meet you. right? And it's just everyone looks exactly the same. And so apparently people spend their whole life trying to get married, and then when they have get-togethers, they all separate. So all the women go in the living room and chat it up, and all the men go out on the deck and cook meat on some propane something or other. And what it is. And I'm totally out of my element, right? And so they're like, well, come join us on the deck. I'm like, why are you guys not with the women, right? I want to be with the women. Anyway, so I don't get it. So I go and they've got the deck with the built-in bench. You know what I'm talking about? So you got the big red deck with the built-in bench and here's Stuart, and some how the Lord works. And so, I'm meeting the guys. Hello, nice to see you. And they're random chit chat about sports, which is what men use to avoid intimacy. And and so, sorry, too harsh. And so, anyway, right. So I'm chatting up with these guys. I don't really know what to talk about, and I mean they're all talking about their jobs and their kids, right? They got the kids out in the lawn. Right, in the backyard, they're all running around. That once again looks like Lord of the Flies. Right, there's kids everywhere. They're all talking about like their kids, the first tooth, and where they buy kids, going to the baby gap and the fat gap for fat kids, and right, and it's all this, what school they're enrolled in, and how they're so smart. My son's going to be a genius, And all the kids look like New Year's Day floats, right? They got little bodies, giant heads, right? They're all kind of, And I just lost the parents, didn't I? And so anyway, so now you can see why I'm single. And anyway, so and they're all, it's all this stuff about their kids and going to school and all the first steps and and so I'm listening to all this stuff, right? And I started to get really insecure. Meanwhile, I'm sitting on the built-in thing that they self-built from Lowe's or whatever, the do-it-yourself place. And I can tell it's self-built because it's all, it's like walking through a fun house, right? It's all different levels it's like, there's carpenters for this. And so I'm sitting on this bench and on this unleveled deck, and they hand me a plate with something this guy just cooked on the propane burner, and I'm not even sure what it was, and I don't really know. I mean, I know it was meat, and I'm certain that when the cow gave his life for it, he did not know to the extent that his flesh would be charred. And so they kind of put this plate on my lap, and it's got this burnt piece of meat on it. The guy says, "Can I get you anything else?" And I was like, "Yes, a shroud," and because this has been crucified, and it's dead, and so I'm listening to all this chit chat, right, about their wives and their kids and schools and jobs and all of this stuff, right? And so I'm sitting there, and all of a sudden, there's this awkward silence. You ever been in a crowd where there's awkward silence, and they all turn and look at me? Right? They're waiting for me to add something to the conversation, right? I'm supposed to add something, right? And all these things, all this stuff just runs in my mind together, right? The kids, the minivan, the houses, the job. These guys got jobs and kids, and the kids are in the lawn, and I'm looking at this dead piece of flesh, and then all the guys on the deck turn and look at me, and I go, I got a new pair of shoes. And I know the women were like, I wish I had a new pair of shoes. And all the men were like, you bought something without permission? And I didn't do that? So I spent the whole evening over there, right? And the whole entire time, I felt so awkward. And by the time I got in my car, I felt so defeated. Because I thought, oh man, all these guys are my age, right? They got homes, they got cars, they got jobs, they got all this stuff, And I'm getting ready, I get in the car, and I spent this whole evening with people that listed off. You know, to experience all this stuff. You know, and I'm driving out of deep suburbia back to my, you know, I'm not even staying in the Best Inn. I'm staying in the, you know, like Motel 666, and I'm coming back to a crappy hotel, you know, and I think, and I'm back in Atlanta by myself, you know, and I think, God, man, what have I done? I've been on the road for 10 years, and look at all these guys, man, they got lives and kids and wives, and look at all this stuff. And then I just felt like there was a brush fire that got ignited in my soul. I thought, maybe I've missed out on all this stuff, and I'll never forget it. I'm in the middle of Atlanta, and I heard the Spirit of God say to me, Dave, you are exactly where I need you to be. And this is a word for somebody in this room tonight. And it's easy to let your life be defined by all of that. Paul says we rejoice, but we live as though we haven't rejoiced. We make full use of the world, and we go through the stages of life, but we're not defined by those things. And God has you exactly where you need to be at this season of your life. You're not here because you lost, or you're defeated, or because you missed some sort of option, or because you missed an opportunity. God has you where you need to be. And I'll never forget the Spirit of God saying, you're right where I need you to be. You're doing exactly what I've designed you to do. And once I heard that, then that wasn't ever such a battle for me anymore after that. I was like, okay, all right. I'm just going to go with that. I'm going to go with that. I've got to locate my source of confidence. All of us do. And it's not going to be another person. And it's not going to be a possession. It's not going to be a category, whether you're single or married, divorced, widowed, widower. All those things happen. But your source of confidence is your identity. You are a son of God. You're a daughter of God. And God has you where He needs you to be at this moment of your life. And so we have to challenge it. We've got to take our mind back to this. We've got to take our hearts back to this, as many times as necessary until that becomes real. See it? So you got to locate your source of confidence. Not only that, number two, right? We have to listen to the sacred call. Right? We have to listen to the sacred call. Right? So this is what he's talking about. So he goes through this whole deal and says we have to live as though, right? As though these things haven't defined us. And we don't live as though God doesn't care. We have to live as though that He does know where we are, right? But then look at this. But verse 32, but I want you to be free from concern. And the one who is unmarried is concerned about the things of the Lord and how he may please the Lord. Right now, I got to tell you, I've heard, everybody talk. They get to this verse and they go, "You have so much more time to serve God." Right? And I have to say, I really hate hearing that. And because a lot of us are like most of us like, let's go for missions as long as the mission field is filled with dating options, right? I mean, that's kind of where we are. We're like, I don't want to just serve God, but that's not, for most of it, that's not our whole focus, right? But he's trying to get this church not just to get involved in missions, right? He's trying to get them to listen to the call of God that's on their life. God has a call on your life. It's not just about ministry or leaving the country and going to another third world someplace. That may be part of it. But all of us, man, we're to be listening for that call every single day of our life. We've all heard the call of the world, right? We don't have a problem figuring out what the world is calling us to do. There's no big struggle for us to figure out what the world wants us to do with our weekend, right? We've all heard that call, right? But Paul's trying to get them to hear the call of the Spirit. On how in other words, how am I to live so that it's pleasing to God? Right? We've all heard the call of ourselves. We know how to live for ourselves, right? We know how to please ourselves. Right? That's not a big issue. You don't get up wondering what is the call of the world, what's the call of my flesh, right? We all know what those things are. Right? It's all second nature to us. What we have to train ourselves to do is to listen to the call of the Spirit. And then he says, how to live in a way that pleases the Lord. We know how to please ourselves. Right? But I wonder how many of us have been single for a long time and thought, man, am I living in a way that honors God on a daily basis? You see what I'm saying? Am I living as a called one in my job? You know, the question I get all the time is, you know, how do you do it on the road? You know, I mean, especially preachers ask me this, right? But, you know, man, how do you stay faithful on the road? That's preacher code for, you're not watching porn, are you? And, right, that's what they're asking, you know. And no, I'm not. That's not been I have to say, that's not been my big struggle. I've just really struggled with drugs or drinking or embezzlement or pornography or anything that would qualify me to be an evangelist. And, because I felt like that, you know, that for me to be unmarried was part of the assignment. So for me, like I had to train myself to listen to that call. We've all heard the call of our age or the fear of being alone. We've all heard those calls. We know what those voices sound like. Right? What we have to do is train ourselves to hear the call of God and say, you know what, I got to figure out how to live as a widow or a widower in a way that pleases God. I got to figure out how to live as a retired person in a way that pleases God. I got to figure out how to be a nurse or go back to an office and to listen to that call. You know, so I haven't had a lot of bouts of, being afraid of if I'm missing out on something, because I keep listening for that call to live in such a way that pleases the Lord. See, that's a bigger picture. This is not just about, hey, you're single, you got time to go serve. Anybody can preach that, right? The greater call is that, man, you've got to dial into the call that's on your life in a daily way, right? Because when we stop listening to that call, if you're a note taker, let me give you the consequences of not listening to that call. Ready? The fallout of listening to your own call, or listening to the call of the world, or listening to the call of fear, right? The consequences of not listening to the call of God is that it erodes our relationships with other people, right? Because all of a sudden, we don't see our relationships in terms of, hey, I'm in these friendships because, man, I'm responding to the call of God. God has me with you. You know, our lives have converged these Thursdays because there's a calling for you to be here, calling for me to be here, right? So that's the way I see it. It's not a gig, it's not a job, right? There's a sense, there's a call to what's happening in the room. You see it? Right? And when we stop listening to that call, it affects all of our relationships. Some of us know what it's like to have trouble inside of a dating relationship or a marriage relationship because you get two people that stop listening to that call. They listen to their own call. Hey, I want to be happy. I want to do what I want to do. Right? I'm tired of doing what you want to do. I want to do what I want to do. Right? All of a sudden, that relationship starts to break down because you get two people that are listening to different calls. You see it? And the second consequence of not listening to that call is we start to make really bad decisions. We make bad decisions with our free time, with our money, with our weekends. Right? We start to make bad decisions about relationships and how we treat people and how we handle some of the most valuable things in our life. Because, man, when you stop listening to that call, that God's called me to live a certain way that brings honor to Him, when you stop listening to that call, it begins, you see the breakdown in the kind of decisions that you're making. This is not just about right or wrong. This is not about, well, he's wrong and I'm right. It's about, wait a minute, at what point did we shut our hearts off to the call of God? When did that happen? When did we just go, you know, forget it, I'm going to do what I want to do? I know what that feels like. I've been married, but I've been through some terrible relationships that made me go, forget it. I'm going to do what I want to do. Right? And to find restoration, you have to listen to the call again. You've got to listen to the call. Right? And when we stop listening to the call, it erodes our relationships. We make bad decisions. And it distorts our view of God. It distorts our view of God, right? Because when you stop listening to the call, to say, you know, I've got to figure out what it looks like to be unmarried and to be fully devoted to the Lord. It doesn't just mean you volunteer for preschool, Sunday school. That's not what that means. It means that our life looks a certain way. Right? And when we stop listening to that call, we start to see God as a means to an end. God, just make me not hurt. Make me not be lonely. Right? Make this work out. Make these people in my life behave. Make my kids behave. God, make my ex behave. But all of a sudden, we start to see God as a means to an end, instead of listening to the call and letting our life rise up to that. You see it? Right? So Paul, he's pastoring these people how to dial down the strife, right? And increase the life by locating their source of confidence, by listening to the sacred call. Right? And number 3, we have to live in the spirit of choice. Right? We have to live in the spirit of choice. Right? So he says, that how you may please the Lord. Verse 35, this I say for your own benefit, not to put a restraint on you, but to promote what is appropriate and to secure undistracted devotion to the Lord. In other words, how then do I live as an unmarried person in an undistracted way? Right? This is not, hey, you're not married, go be a missionary. That's not what this is about. Right? He's talking about how we live. Right? So Paul says, I'm not trying to shut you down. I'm not trying to take you, if you desire to be married again, you can be. Right? At this point, God has you where you need to be until that next season comes in your life. Right? And so Paul's saying, I'm not trying to take away what you desire. I'm not trying to shut you down. I'm trying to get you to a place where you can live in the fullness of God. Less strife, more life. You see it? Right? And so he says we have to live by the spirit of choice. So we're reading these verses out of order, and that's on purpose, right? Look at verse 22. For he who is called in the Lord while a slave is the Lord's freedom. Likewise, he who is called while free is the Lord's slave. He's saying, well, in whatever state we find ourselves in, we're going to say, at this moment of my life, I'm going to live by choice. Right? Look how this goes on. Look at verse 23. For you were bought with a price. Do not become slaves of men. Right? In other words, don't let yourself be defined by all this other stuff. Don't let yourself be defined by the past or the city. Right? Don't become slaves of that. You've been bought with a price. Right? He's dialing in the fact that their source of confidence is the Lord, that there's a call in their life. Look at verse 24. Brethren, each one is to remain with God in that condition which he's called. Right? Until that new season comes. But here's the deal. This is all choice. So if you're a note taker, right, the point is we have to live by a spirit of choice. This is all a matter of choice. You say, listen, if you're a slave and you find the Lord, you're free in God. If you're free and you come to the Lord, then you're a slave unto the Lord. But either way, you've been bought with a price. There's a high value on your life. So we have to say, you know what? I'm going to let that drive the choices that I make. So if you're a note taker, let me give you what this is. To say I'm going to live by a spirit of choice is not to be weak. It's not to be boring. It doesn't mean that you become passive and go, well, I'm just going to wait on God. Right? I got to wait on God. Right? That's not what this means. Right? To live in the spirit of choice. Here it is for your note taker. I'll say it slowly so you can write it down. Ready? To live in the spirit of choice is choosing to believe that God is aware of my circumstances. Living in the spirit of choice is choosing to believe that God is aware of my circumstances and my condition, and is positively responding to meet my needs as I stay faithful to him. Right? Living by a spirit of choice is choosing to believe that God is fully aware of my circumstances and my condition. That he knows what we're having to live in the middle of. He knows what you've had to walk through and what it took to get you where you are. That God's fully aware of your condition. Right? And your circumstances. What you're having to live with or live without. Your circumstances. And is positively responding to my circumstances and my condition as I remain faithful. So this means you say, you know what?